Yesterday in my sermon, we looked at the biblical doctrine of Sabbath. We saw that Sabbath is a creation principle that has very definite New Covenant implications. It's not a law like it was in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, but it is a principle in the same category as, say, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. It's not an option. It's a spiritual discipline that we must implement if we want to live a healthy, maturing spiritual life. So I fully believe that God intends for us today, in the 21st century, to practice a Sabbath rest, the principle of 1 day out of 7. We have freedom in how we do it. We're not bound by the law, but the Sabbath is designed to create white space in our lives, and we're only hurting ourselves and our relationships when we ignore it or let ourselves get too busy. In this video, I want to unpack just a little bit more of what a Sabbath might look like for us in the 21st century. I want to go back to the Ten Commandments, where the concept of Sabbath is really developed, for some ideas on what Sabbath should mean to us today. The Ten Commandments are given to Israel in Exodus 20, and then they're repeated again in Deuteronomy 5 as Israel is about to enter the Promised Land. There are some interesting differences in how the Sabbath command is expressed in these two passages, and I think those differences are instructional as to what the Sabbath means and how we can honor it today. In Exodus chapter 20, the fourth commandment has its basis in creation. Listen to verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. But in the Deuteronomy passage, the basis of Sabbath seems to be more about the fact that Israel had been slaves. Look at verse 15. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. At least part of the reason God gave Israel the Sabbath command was because God rescued Israel from slavery in Egypt. Pharaoh enslaved the Israelites because of his craving for more wealth. So he wanted more cities in which to store his wealth, and so he enslaves an entire people to satisfy his insatiable lust for more. I'm sure that Pharaoh never gave Israel a day of rest. They were slaves. And so today, we take a Sabbath day as a reminder that we are no longer slaves to work, to money, to productivity, to labor. We can take a day and simply not produce. It's a day that disrupts the cycle of lusting after more and more stuff, more and more activity, more and more productivity. And in that day of stopping, of ceasing all that, there is freedom. There's a lot of modern slavery in our lives. We're slaves to our jobs, we're slaves to our schedules, we're slaves to our stuff, we're slaves to our mortgages, we're slaves to society's expectations of how we're supposed to live, we're slaves to getting ahead, we're slaves to lusting after more and more stuff, and we're certainly slaves to our smartphones and social media. Sabbath reminds us that we are not to be slaves to anything except Christ alone. You know, and sometimes the worst slave master is our own need to be in control. Taking a Sabbath undercuts our need for control. Taking a Sabbath day admits that the world is going to get by without my input for the day. Taking a Sabbath forces us to admit the limits of our indispensability and to see the world in terms of gift and blessing instead of utility. Taking a Sabbath means we stop and we let things go. It challenges our attitude of self-sufficiency, self-importance, of control and materialism. Sabbath is a way of practicing the belief that it is God who is in control, and it is God who provides, and we can rest, we can sit back, we can stop. And it's a statement of dependence that God's in control. Let's go back to the Exodus passage where Sabbath is rooted in creation. And I think what that means, or at least an application for us today, is that getting out into creation is a good way to spend at least part of your Sabbath. Look at chapter 20 of Exodus and verse 11 again. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, The Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Sabbath is a great time to enjoy God's creation, the heavens, the earth, the sea. Go for a hike, sit at the beach, go to a park, watch the ducks, have a picnic, go kayaking, whatever it is you love to do. Maybe it's just sitting in your backyard, sipping lemonade, watching the birds, listening to the wind blow through the trees. God created this for our enjoyment and our pleasure. And in Exodus 20, he seems to tie Sabbath back to his creation. Sabbath is God's design to give us time to expose more white space in our lives. We're too busy. We're given work to do for 6 days, and work is good and God ordained, but 1 day a week, 14% of our time, we're to stop, rest, give up control. Don't be productive. Enjoy the fact that you're not a slave. Prove that you're not a slave. Be content with what God has provided. Enjoy the textures and the sights and the sounds of this world that he created for our pleasure. If we truly want to live countercultural lives of following hard after Jesus, then I suggest practicing Sabbath is not an option. Now, tomorrow we're going to take a closer look at the major enemy of Sabbath, busyness. So I hope you join us tomorrow for another segment. Thanks.